I'm so glad we have this chance to sit down and dive a little bit deeper into what's been going on in your life. And I think about your life, you've had such a long and storied career with so many different seasons and creative projects and innovations. What is the fuel that keeps you able to keep innovating and coming up with new ideas?
You know, it's how I'm wired, I guess, is part of it. As I go through life, I'm open to what I call seeds of inspiration, and the way I also process both difficulties and joys in my life is I write out of those experiences, right? So, and I guess there's just been enough encouragement from some of the earlier efforts that I did that, oh, maybe this is something I can do. Maybe this is something that helps people. So then I guess I just keep on taking the risk to be vulnerable, to try something new. And, I think it's the blend of, for me, singing the older songs, maybe that some people know more because they've been around for 30 plus years, and then singing songs I wrote last week, and it's just keep on going through life like that.
We have a project here called Royal Anthems, and it's to kind of foster unity among worship leaders to write Canadian songs for the Canadian church. Now, you were doing this decades before we started it here, and of course, your songs went around the world. But what is the value of, distinctly Canadian songs?
Well, as we were chatting before we went on air, one of the things I deeply believe is place matters. I believe story matters. I believe history matters. And I've always felt like that out of wherever we're planted, out of those roots, we bloom, we express part of that reality. And songs are not only cultural expressions, they're culture carriers, right? So when we write something out of who we are and being influenced by where we are, then, and our shared values together as a culture and our shared distinctives, it changes. Sometimes, people on the surface go, well, what's the difference between a song written in the United States or Britain and Canada? But there's these little subtle markers that are rooted in place, that are rooted in story, that are rooted in who we are as a people. And, nobody else can write that song other than the people that are rooted in that place. So I've always believed in that rootedness and then expressing it.
I think that's so cool that in a way it almost confirms our identity or confirms our culture. As Canadians, sometimes we've had a hard time in the past defining our culture. It's becoming a little bit easier, it seems like these days, or we're clinging to it a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I think that's so wise. And, another thing you do is you write into the gap. Can you just unpack what that means?
Oh, this is my life. My very first published song was a gap. I describe it as a gap moment. I had this moment with our first baby daughter, Rachel, and I picked her up and I held her close, and all of a sudden I realized as I was holding her and I was filled with unconditional love for her. Before she'd accomplished anything, she just existed. And that was the great gift. And I realized I wanted to take this experience and express it to my Heavenly Father, but I couldn't find a song that expressed that. The gap revealed itself to me. I wrote into the gap a simple song from my heart. And I thought, this is my secret song, and I'm going to sing it to my Maker, and I'm going to sing it as I walk around holding my daughter. And then by a series of circumstances, some other people happened to hear it, and it traveled. And to this day, I still keep on writing to the gap. I wait for a gap to reveal itself to me, and then I go, there's my songwriting assignment. Fill that gap with love. Fill that gap with grace. Fill it with, and a unique expression, like a song that only I can write, so to speak, because I have a unique set of, roots and backgrounds and culture perspectives, and that's what I do.
And so, you think about thousands of years of songs that we have, yet there's still gaps. I think that's amazing.
Well, those gaps, there will always be gaps. I call them, there's various types of gaps. There's these specific gaps that are just perfectly sized for a song by a certain writer. But there's also what I call Grand Canyon gaps, that we need more songs about love, more songs about grace, more songs about the earth and the gift that it is to us to be here, And so we keep writing into whatever it is we notice that we need to write about,
Well, and you noticed that there is nothing written about long love. So tell me about your most recent project.
Yeah, well, this was, in that whole kind of strange COVID season. I had done a hymns project with my father. That was finished, and I was just asking that question, what's next? Often on my morning walks, exercise, prayer, I'm literally just opening myself up, what's next? And I had this thought, the world is filled with songs about falling in love, but not a lot of songs about staying in love. And as I'm walking, I'm thinking about my wife, who we've been married at this point, at that point we've been married like 38 years. And I thought, man, I want to write her some songs that describe what this relationship not only means to me, but what it means to all couples, and to also write songs that show the world that it's still possible. Whether it's first marriage, second marriage, whatever the situation is, long love, that aching, and I think it's in all of us as human beings. And so I saw the gap and I started writing, and I thought, I'll write a few songs, and I ended up writing 40
Wow.
over a couple of year period. And that's when Joyce and I realized, oh, maybe we should do something about it.
And, as you're thinking of that through, like the difference between long love and falling in love, which we're so enamored of in our culture, what did you learn as you were kind of diving into that?
That long love is made up of every season. So it is made, it often starts, love at first sight, that expression. You can literally encounter somebody and know that you're meant for each other. That can actually happen, and that's an important maybe first step. Then it's making a commitment. Then it's going through the various seasons of life. And Joyce will sometimes smile when she introduces me to some new people. She goes, "Oh, this is Brian. He's my 6th husband." And you kind of can see, and some people of faith get a little concerned when they hear this. They like this look of panic crosses their face, and they're like, what did she just say? And then I smile and I say, yeah, and she's my 3rd wife, but she's actually becoming my 4th wife. In other words, we change, right? Like when we got married, Joyce and I, we were 19. I mean, that's crazy, All parents of 19-year-olds are like, how did that, Like, so then you go through all the physical changes, you go through emotional changes, you go through seasons of suffering, and it changes some of who you are, not all of who you are, and you have to keep on recommitting. So I wanted these songs to express the spark, but then the sustained flame, that thing that just keeps on going. Okay, oh, you've had this happen to you. This is really hard, but I'm still here. Well, what happens to a marriage when you make that choice? We have the great blessing and challenge of being parents of special needs kids. We have 2 sons with Fragile X syndrome. I remember finding out about that, and I read the stat: over 80% of marriages with children like that end in divorce because the strain is just too much. Okay, so how are we gonna write our story in a way? And we just made some choices. We're gonna go on a date every week. We're going to, we made priorities that ultimately, even though caring for our boys is incredibly important, caring for each other was most important. And being honest with each other. And so I think the body of work, the album Love for a Lifetime, has 12 songs. There are 12 songs. They're all different. They have different aspects of what it means to be in a long love. And it's our story, but it's also other couples. We had other couples sponsor songs because it costs to do an album, and the streaming age, you don't make much of that back. So they read my lyrics and went, oh, this sounds like our relationship. We'll sponsor this song. And so we had, 9 different couples sponsor songs that expressed a bit of their story, which was a real joy because we didn't want it to be just about us. Mm-hmm. It's about us, It's about us as a people, that we need to value long love in our world.
And I know some people watching have had that long love, and they know what you're talking about. They know the price, they know the commitment, they know the hard and the good. But I know other people are just clinging on with, like their fingernails to marriage right now before walking out the door and maybe going through a really hard season. What encouragement would you have for people who are struggling right now in their marriage?
I mean, honestly, I think one of the things I would say is if you're in an incredibly difficult situation or in an abusive situation, it's not your job to stay just because you started out that way. But if both of you are willing to keep leaning in, to keep recommitting to the new version, to the number 5, number 6 of who you become as the years change, there is a way through, and there is so much joy as we can let go and be at rest because we're so fully known, and we know we're not going to be rejected even when we make a mistake, and one of the songs, "Oh, to know the love that fills the cracks with golden grace." I mean, we are all filled with cracks. I had our designer for the album, for all the singles, every image is kintsugi because it's like we're all cracked as people, but gold, the grace, comes and fills those cracks. And that's it is divine, but it's not just the divine, it's the human. It's literally the choice that my wife makes and I make for her, to love each other, to be tender, to wait when we want to rush, to all of those little things, and to keep doing the practices, dating each other, giving gifts to each other, complimenting each other. All of those practices matter. And you just keep doing them, and eventually the harvest comes,
Such great advice. And Brian, I love the depth and the wisdom that you bring to every conversation we have. Thank you so much for stopping by, and just can't wait to hear the album.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, and I hope it's an encouragement.